Welcome to Life.Quantum.Action. This podcast is for people who already know the work and are learning how to live it. We talk all about identity, business, money, leadership, manifestation, and what it actually takes to stay with who you're becoming when life applies pressure. I'm Carly, and I am so glad that you're here. Now, whether you have been a long-time listener of the podcast, formerly known as Thrive, or whether you're brand new here, welcome. And I want to start this podcast by being super clear and intentional about who it's for. This isn't for people who are brand new to personal development, brand new to manifestation or mindset or identity work or whatever the language is that you want to use. This is for people who already know this work. You've done the courses, you've had breakthroughs, and you've had these moments where you're like, okay, things are clicking and you're thinking, okay, I get it now. And then all of a sudden, life happens, business happens, pressure happens, and suddenly you found yourself looping and circling around who it is that you say you want to be. And if you've ever thought, oh, I understand this, I get this at a logical level, but why the heck isn't it staying? Why the heck do I find myself at the beginning of every year reflecting on last year and feeling like I'm starting in the same place all over again? If you've ever thought that, then this podcast is for you. Now, I personally have been in this space for a really long time. I started Thrive, or the podcast formerly known as Thrive, and it's actually had a number of different names, a number of different iterations, and a number of different identities of me. But I started that podcast at the end of 2019. And I was a brand new mum. I was brand new into kind of looking at, okay, if I want to start a business, if I want to do something for myself, what does that get to look like? I've taught, I've coached, I've built a business, and I have changed identities. I've changed identities more times than I can count. And, I even would prefer to use the term evolved identities more times than I can count. And for many years, like for so long, I honestly thought that there was something wrong with me. I would have these moments of clarity, like real clarity, where I felt really solid, I felt really aligned, and I felt really certain in who I was being and in where I was going, in what I was creating, in what I was here to do. And then under pressure, I would start to wobble. So when big decisions needed to be made, or when visibility started to increase, or when there was like a next level of responsibility, I would start to wobble. And it wasn't like a really big dramatic wobble where I would go and like lock myself in my bedroom for weeks at a time. It wasn't anything like that, but it was a really quiet kind of wobble, or there were multiple quiet wobbles. And that would look like me second guessing myself. It would look like me softening my message for fear of, being too much. And then I would reset myself and I would pivot. And I kept thinking, like, why do I keep coming back here if I already know this? Why do I continue finding myself back in this place when I already know what I know? And so what I eventually saw, and this is the very core of this podcast, I eventually saw that nothing was broken. Nothing at all was broken. It just wasn't stabilized yet. I wasn't stable in who I wanted to be, in who I was choosing to be. And I didn't know that I actually needed to stay through the void, through that liminal space, through that period where it feels really quiet and where it feels like nothing is happening. So I thought that those periods meant that there was something wrong. But it was just that I hadn't learned how to stay through that period of discomfort and to let my identity stabilize. And there is a massive, massive, massive difference between knowing something And you might feel like this right now. You know the information. Like, you know what you need to do. In fact, maybe you've even done it before. But there is a big difference between knowing something and being able to stay as that person when pressure kicks in, or when you're not seeing the results immediately. And most of the work out there, most of the coaching, most of the courses, most of the podcasts and all of the things are very much focused on activation, breakthroughs, these big moments, these big realizations. But there's very little work that talks about what actually happens after, right? So when the novelty wears off, when the excitement starts to dwindle, when the stakes are higher, when shit starts getting real, and when your life asks you to actually live from what you've realized and who you want to be. And this is the point. This is where things fall apart for a lot of really, really capable people. And if this is you, it's not because you're failing, but it's because the identity just hasn't caught up yet. And this is what we do here. Okay, we get comfortable with the uncomfortable. We allow ourselves to sit in the quiet where things feel like they're not happening, where you're in that place, that liminal space. That's what we get really good at doing here. And here is something that I see constantly within myself, certainly in the past, and within my clients. Things start working. Momentum builds, opportunities come in, and money starts flowing, visibility starts to increase. And instead of feeling excited, there's this sense of pressure, this sense of shit. Can I actually do this? Decisions feel harder to make. You might not feel as confident as what you once felt. And you start hesitating in moments that you feel like they should be really simple, like really simple by now. And most people, they will interpret this as, okay, I'm not ready. Or I need to go and get more confident, or I need a better strategy. How many times have you looked at where things are at in your business and you've changed your strategy? And this was something that I used to do a lot. And, I would sort of go like, why doesn't this strategy work for me? Or why does this strategy that once did work for me and once worked really well for me, why the fuck is it not working now? So I'll go and look back through all of my old notebooks from all of the coaching that I've done in the past and all the different strategies. And I'd be looking for that silver bullet, that strategy that's going to change everything for me. But while I was looking for that strategy, I wasn't allowing my identity to actually stabilize. And this is the thing that is happening for a lot of people. Okay. And it's a lot quieter and it's a lot more under the surface than the next best strategy, a little bit more confidence, or waiting to feel ready. What's happening here for a lot of people is that growth has expanded faster than the identity has stabilized. And when identity hasn't quite settled at that level yet, and you might see glimpses of it, you're kind of dipping in and out of that identity. So it hasn't settled yet. And when that identity hasn't settled at that level yet, your system is going to look for something familiar, because that's what it does. That's what we are wired to do. We are wired to seek something familiar that's going to make us feel safe. And in this context, that often looks like overthinking. It looks like pulling back. It looks like changing direction and pivoting and starting over yet again. And you might not even be consciously aware of that. A lot of the time, this is happening deep under the surface, deep in the subconscious. And you're not doing this because the direction that you had initially chosen was wrong. but it's because staying there and actually allowing yourself to persist through the quiet period felt harder than starting all over again. And, I'm a recovering pivoter, right? Where I would often do this, and I would often look at the results that I was getting, or the results that I wanted but wasn't getting, and rather than actually staying and allowing my identity to settle and stabilize at that level, I would look at, what can I do? How can I speed this up? The direction I've chosen, because I haven't seen the result that I wanted in 3.5 days, must be wrong. So I've got to go and try something different. And so what was happening is exactly that. Like, I wasn't allowing that identity to settle. I wasn't giving any strategy real time to actually kind of, take off. And maybe you relate to that too. And the part that a lot of people don't like to look at, or don't consciously think to look at, is that constantly resetting yourself is not a neutral place to be. It is not neutral. It is costing you energy. It is costing you momentum, and it is costing you trust in yourself to actually stay and stabilize and allow something to grow. And let's think about this like a garden. If you were to go and plant a seed, after 3.5 days, would you go out there and dig the seed up and ask it why it's not growing just yet? You wouldn't do that. I don't think you would do that. You would plant the seed, you would nurture it, you would water it, and you would allow it to grow in its own time, because you trust that that's what happens. You deeply trust that process. And so what this constantly resetting or constantly digging up the seed actually does is, over time, it creates this really subtle narrative of, I'm always almost there. And that's an identity that I can very much relate to. And I can tell you it is exhausting. I can tell you that is absolutely exhausting, of feeling like I'm almost always there, but not understanding why. And what most people actually want, it's not another breakthrough, even though they think that the next breakthrough, or the next belief that they uncover, the next real big piece of healing work is going to give them what they want. What they really want deep down is relief, and they want stability, and they want to stop redeciding who they are every single time life applies pressure. They want to stop hitting the reset button on their manifestations and on their identity and who they're being. Because every time we're hitting that reset button, there's the energy cost, the momentum cost, the self-trust cost, which is probably the most important one. This podcast is about that missing middle, that space, that almost like, that feels like a little bit of an emptiness, that void, that liminal space, the space between knowing what you know and living as though you really, truly fucking believe it and you're embodying it in every moment. That space between deciding and continuing to live from that decision. Because how many times have you made a decision and you're like, oh, they tell me that if I want to manifest what I want, I just need to decide, which is true. But you're not just deciding once. You've got to decide every single day and revisit that decision, live that decision, remind yourself of what you're deciding, and live as that person. It's the space between being activated and then actually staying there. Because how many times have you gone and let's say you've either worked with a coach or you've done a workshop, you've gone to something and you've just like, oh my God, I feel so activated right now. And you believe in yourself. You believe that anything is possible. And then all of a sudden, the days and the weeks that follow, that feeling kind of starts to dissipate. That feeling starts to dissolve. That's because of that choice to not stay there. And I can tell you like how many programs I have done and experienced that exact same thing. Experienced those breakthroughs. Experienced those moments where it's like, oh my God, everything's shifted. Nothing's ever going to be the same again. Made the decision of who I'm going to be, who I am, what I know, and then I've not lived it. I've not stayed there. I've not sustained it. And so if that is you, please know that you're not alone there. And this is the part that people don't really talk about enough. And this is what I really want to shine the light on here with Life.Quantum.Action. And none of this is about fixing yourself or feeling like you have to fix yourself or become somebody new. It's about stabilizing who you already know yourself to be so that you don't abandon it when things start to get real. Because I'm telling you, like anybody can decide who they're going to be in the moments where it feels easy. But who are you choosing to be in the moments where your business or where your life starts to apply pressure? Who are you being in those moments? Are you running away from it? Or are you choosing to stay? Are you choosing to hold what you know to be true? Or are you choosing to abandon yourself and what it is that you really want because of a little bit of pressure? So we're going to talk all about identity. We're going to talk all about business. We might have a little chat about money, leadership, responsibility, the very quiet patterns that repeat under the surface that you're probably not even aware of. And we are going to talk about what it actually takes to stay. And I want to share with you some very real life like applications of this. It's not just theory, and this podcast is not meant for you to listen to and then feel like you have to go and do something after. Because sometimes just staying and allowing it to marinate is the most important thing that you can do. So this is all about the very real life applications of what it takes to stay in your new identity, which then creates the results that you want. And what I want to be super clear about is that this podcast is not going to be about manifesting outcomes. Yes, that will absolutely be a byproduct, right? And if you can get to that space where you can stay and you can persist in your new identity and you can be that person who you say that you want to be, absolutely you will manifest the things that you want. But this is not going to be a space where we sit and talk about techniques and rituals and how you can go and, I don't know, dance under the moon, hopping on one leg, writing your desires down and burning them in the fire. Okay, that's not what manifestation is. I'm just going to call that out right now. It's all about who you're being. It is all about your identity. It is what you assume to be true about yourself, other people, and about the world. It's not about affirming for 20 minutes, scripting for another 10, and then expecting that your life is going to change while you spend the other 23 and a half hours of every single day being who you've always been. This is about true identity shift. which means being the person that you want to be and choosing to stay there and not just throw it all away when it starts to get a little bit hard. And I say that with love, and I say that with fucking compassion because I know what that is like, because I have been there and I have done that. And I have seen some incredible results in my business. And I can now also see where I didn't get the results that I wanted in certain phases or certain areas because I didn't know what it took to actually stay and to sit in the quiet and to persist and to not jump from strategy to strategy and not jump from coach to coach to coach to coach, thinking that I always needed more information. This is not about more information. You know enough. And I'm going to tell you that right now. You know enough. This is about trusting that you know enough and allowing yourself to back your decision, to back yourself, to trust yourself so radically that you don't feel like you need to go and look for more information or go through your old notebooks and watching the old video modules of all the courses that you've bought in the past, looking for that next strategy, looking for that next piece of healing that you need to do. And I work privately with women in business in this exact phase. The women who are already capable, they're already moving, they're getting some results in their business. Maybe they're not quite getting the results that they want just yet, but they're already moving, they've got momentum, they're already doing meaningful work. But these women have noticed that under pressure, and when things get real or when things get a little bit tricky, a little bit hard, something still wobbles. And this podcast is an extension of all of that work. Okay? So it's not necessarily going to be a how to change your life in 3 steps. Okay? And I sat with the intention of this podcast for a number of months. The last episode of Thrive went out in June last year. So, I haven't released anything for 6 to 7 months. And there's been a reason for that. I could have very easily just continued on with how Thrive was going. And it was a bit of this and a bit of that. And it was great. It was a lot of fun. But I also knew that the work I had been doing within myself, particularly the second half of 2025, because that work called me into this new iteration of Carly, this new identity. And this podcast is really a culmination of all of that. And so you look at this as a place to sit with these ideas and some of the concepts and the applications, sit with them long enough for them to actually land. How we do one thing is how we do everything. And so the concept and the core and the premise of this podcast is learning how to stay. How can we stay with something such as this podcast without feeling the need to go and binge the next episode, without feeling the need to move on to the next thing? Okay, so you don't need to do anything with this episode. You don't need to go and apply it. You don't need to go and change anything. If anything, I want you to just notice what stayed with you after listening to this, and just notice if anything has come up for you, if anything has maybe been an invitation for you to reflect on how you're being, perhaps what areas you're not staying in and really persisting in, because that's the part that really matters. If you would like to stay with this conversation, then subscribing means that you don't have to go away and look for it. And I will see you in the next episode.